want them to know that what happened to them isn't their fault, and that speaking up isn't betraying their family. It's protecting it. The audience, filled with social workers, teachers, and other advocates, hung on her every word. At 16, Emma had become one of the most powerful voices in the fight against child abuse, not despite her young age, but because of it. She spoke with an authenticity that adult advocates, no matter how well-intentioned, simply couldn't match. After the presentation, a young girl approached Emma hesitantly. She couldn't have been more than 12, with wide eyes that held shadows far too deep for someone so young. "My uncle," the girl whispered, then stopped, looking around nervously. Emma knelt down to the girl's eye level, her heart breaking at the familiar look of fear and confusion she saw there. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Emma asked gently. "Lily," the girl replied, barely audible. "Lily, that's a beautiful name," Emma said. "Listen to me, Lily. Whatever you're feeling right now, whatever you're scared to say, there are people here who will listen and believe you. You don't have to carry heavy secrets by yourself." Emma looked around and spotted Lisa Chen, who had become not just Emma's victim advocate but a close family friend over the years. With a subtle gesture, Emma indicated that Lisa should join them. "This is Lisa," Emma told Lily. "She's someone who helps kids who are going through scary things. She helped me when I was really afraid and didn't know what to do. Would it be okay if she talked with you?" Lily nodded, and Emma watched as Lisa gently led the young girl to a quiet corner where they could talk privately. It was moments like these that reminded Emma why she did this work, why she was willing to relive her own trauma over and over again if it meant helping other children find their voices. Back at home that evening, Emma sat at her desk working on college applications. The irony wasn't lost on her. At an age when most teenagers were worried about standardized tests and prom dates, she was already planning a career dedicated to trauma counseling and child advocacy. Her grades had remained strong throughout her ordeal, partly because throwing herself into schoolwork had been a healthy coping mechanism, and partly because she'd been determined not to let Marcus's actions derail her future. She had her sights set on several universities with strong social work programs, and her essays about overcoming adversity were both powerful and genuine. Sarah knocked on Emma's bedroom door, carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate, a tradition they'd maintained since those early days in the safe house when small comforts had felt like lifelines. "How did the presentation go today?" Sarah asked, settling into the chair beside Emma's desk. "Good," Emma replied, then paused. "There was a girl there. Lily. She's going through something similar to what I went through." Sarah's expression darkened with the familiar anger that always surfaced when reminded that Emma's story wasn't unique, that there were countless other children suffering in silence. "Did Lisa connect her with services?" "Yeah, they were talking when I left. It never gets easier, you know? Knowing that there are so many kids out there dealing with this alone." Sarah reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "But look at what you're doing about it. Look at how many kids you've helped just by being willing to share your story. That matters, Emma. It makes a real difference." Emma smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if none of this had happened. Like, what would normal 16-year-old Emma be worried about right now?" It was a question that came up periodically in therapy, this grieving for the childhood that had been stolen, for the innocence that could never be reclaimed. Dr. Williams, Emma's therapist, had explained that this was a normal part of the healing process, this mourning for what might have been. "I think about that too sometimes," Sarah admitted. "And I have to fight the guilt all over again, the feeling that I failed to protect you from this. Mom, we've talked about this. You couldn't have known. He was so careful, so manipulative. Even I didn't fully understand what was happening at first." It was true, but it didn't make the guilt any easier for Sarah to bear. She'd learned to manage it better over the years, to channel it into positive action rather than self-destructive thoughts, but it never completely went away. Their conversation was interrupted by the phone ringing. Sarah answered, and Emma could hear Detective Rivera's voice on the other end. Even after all these years, calls from Rivera still made Emma's heart skip a beat, bringing back memories of those early days when every phone call had felt like it might bring more bad news. "That was Detective Rivera," Sarah said after hanging up. "Marcus is eligible for parole review next year." Emma felt her stomach drop. She'd known this day would come eventually, but somehow it had always felt safely distant, something to worry about in the far future. What does that mean exactly? Emma asked, trying to keep her voice steady. It means there will be a hearing where the parole board will decide whether he's served enough time and can be safely released. You and I will have the opportunity to speak at the hearing, to tell them how his actions have continued to impact our lives. The thought of seeing Marcus again, even in a controlled courtroom environment, made Emma's skin crawl. She'd worked so hard to build a life where he was just a terrible memory, where his power over her had been completely broken. Do we have to go? Emma asked. No, we don't have to. We could submit written statements instead. But Rivera thinks our presence might carry more weight with the parole board. Emma was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options. Part of her wanted nothing more than to pretend the parole hearing wasn't happening, to continue building her future without looking back at her past. But another part of her, the part that had found strength in speaking truth to power, recognized this as another opportunity to use her voice for protection. Not just her own, but for any future victims Marcus might claim if he were released. I'll do it, Emma said finally. I'll testify at the hearing. The months leading up to the parole hearing were challenging for Emma and her family. The anxiety of potentially facing Marcus again brought back symptoms that Emma thought she'd overcome. Nightmares, panic attacks, and periods of depression that required adjustments to her therapy schedule and medication. But Emma also found strength in preparing for the hearing. Working with prosecutors and victim advocates, she crafted a statement that detailed not just what Marcus had done to her, but the long-term impact his actions had had on her life and development. She talked about the years of therapy, the difficulty forming trusting relationships, the way his betrayal had affected her ability to feel safe in the world. She described the educational and career choices she'd made as a direct result of her trauma, how her entire life trajectory had been altered by his actions. But she also talked about her resilience, her determination not to be defined solely by what had been done to her. She wanted the parole board to understand that while she had survived and even thrived despite Marcus's abuse, his crimes had lasting consequences that would affect her for the rest of her life. The hearing was held on a cold February morning in the same courthouse where Marcus had originally been sentenced. Emma, now 17 and preparing for her senior year of high school, walked into the hearing room with her mother, Detective Rivera, and Lisa Chen by her side. Marcus looked older, grayer, more fragile than she remembered. Prison had aged him in ways that surprised Emma. For so long, he had loomed large in her nightmares, a powerful figure of terror and control. Seeing him diminished by incarceration was both satisfying and somehow anticlimactic. When it was Emma's turn to speak, she approached the podium with the same quiet confidence she developed through years of advocacy work. She looked directly at the parole board members as she began her statement. "My name is Emma Patterson, and I am the victim of Marcus Patterson's crimes," she began. "I was 13 years old when he began sexually abusing me, using his position as my stepfather to access and victimize me over a period of several months." She spoke for nearly 20 minutes, detailing the impact of the abuse on her physical and mental health, her education, her relationships, and her overall life trajectory. She talked about the ongoing therapy, the way certain sounds or smells could still trigger flashbacks, the hypervigilance that made it difficult for her to relax and feel truly safe. But she also spoke about her strength, her advocacy work, and her determination to help other survivors. She wanted the parole board to understand that while she had survived, Marcus's crimes had had profound and lasting consequences. "I am not here today asking for vengeance," Emma concluded. "I am here asking for justice to continue." The sentence Marcus received reflected the severity of his crimes and the long-term impact on my life. I believe he should serve that full sentence, not just for my protection, but for the protection of other children who might be at risk if he were released. When Emma finished her statement, she felt a familiar sense of empowerment that came from using her voice to speak her truth. Regardless of the parole board's decision, she had done everything she could to ensure that Marcus remained incarcerated for the full term of his sentence. Sarah also testified, describing the impact of Marcus's crimes on their family and her own ongoing concerns about his potential release. Detective Rivera presented evidence about the systematic nature of the abuse and Marcus's lack of genuine remorse or rehabilitation during his incarceration. Marcus's attorney argued that his client had served his time quietly, had participated in some counseling programs, and posed no threat to the community. But when given the opportunity to speak on his own behalf, Marcus offered only a brief, vague apology that sounded more calculated than genuine. The parole board deliberated for several hours before announcing their decision. parole denied. Marcus would serve the remainder of his sentence, with the possibility of another parole review in 5 years. Emma felt a wave of relief wash over her as the decision was announced. She had faced her abuser one final time and had played a role in ensuring that he remained incarcerated. It felt like another step toward complete healing, another way of reclaiming her power and agency. As they left the courthouse, Detective Rivera walked with Emma and her family to their car. "You were incredible in there," he told Emma. "Your testimony was powerful and compelling. I think it really made the difference in their decision." "It felt good to speak up one more time," Emma replied. "To know that my voice still has the power to protect people, including myself." Rivera had watched Emma grow from a terrified 13-year-old into a strong, articulate young woman, and he felt proud to have played a small role in her journey toward justice and healing. "What's next for you?" Rivera asked. "College is coming up soon, right?" Emma's face lit up with excitement. "I got accepted to State University's social work program. I start in the fall. I'm planning to specialize in trauma counseling for children and adolescents." It seemed perfectly fitting that Emma would dedicate her professional life to helping other survivors navigate their own paths to healing. She had lived experience that would make her uniquely effective as a counselor and advocate. Over the summer before college, Emma threw herself into her advocacy work with renewed energy. She spoke at conferences, worked with legislators on child protection bills, and mentored other young survivors who were just beginning to find their voices. One of her most meaningful projects was working with a local high school to develop a peer education program about healthy relationships and consent. Standing in front of auditoriums full of teenagers, Emma shared age-appropriate versions of her story and provided practical information about recognizing abuse and accessing help. The response from students was overwhelmingly positive. Many approached her after presentations to share their own concerns or experiences, and Emma was able to connect several students with appropriate resources and support services. "You're making a real difference," one school counselor told Emma after a particularly impactful presentation. "These kids relate to you in a way they might not connect with adult speakers. You're giving them permission to speak up and seek help." As Emma prepared to leave for college, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this point. From a terrified 13-year-old carrying a devastating secret, she had become a confident young woman with a clear sense of purpose and the tools to achieve her goals. The trauma of her abuse would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her entire identity. She had learned to integrate her experiences into a broader narrative of resilience, growth, and service to others. Sarah watched her daughter pack for college with a mixture of pride and bittersweet sadness. Emma's childhood had been cut short by Marcus's crimes, forcing her to develop maturity and strength far beyond her years. But that same strength had also given Emma a sense of purpose and direction that many young people struggle to find. "I'm so proud of who you've become," Sarah told Emma as they loaded the last boxes into the car for the drive to campus. "Not just despite what happened to you, but because of how you chose to respond to it." Emma hugged her mother tightly. Their relationship had been forged in the crucible of trauma but had emerged stronger and more honest than many mother-daughter relationships. They had learned to communicate openly, to support each other through difficult times, and to celebrate their shared strength and resilience. At college, Emma threw herself into her studies with the same determination she had brought to her advocacy work. She excelled in her psychology and social work courses, finding that her personal experience gave depth and authenticity to her academic understanding of trauma and recovery. She also became involved in campus organizations focused on sexual assault prevention and survivor support. Her residence hall elected her as a peer educator, recognizing her ability to create safe spaces for difficult conversations about consent, relationships, and personal safety. During her sophomore year, Emma began working as a volunteer at a local crisis center, providing support to other survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence. It was challenging work that sometimes triggered her own memories and emotions, but it was also deeply fulfilling. "I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," Emma told her therapist during one of their sessions. "Like everything I went through, as horrible as it was, led me to this place where I can really help people." Her therapist, Dr. Williams, had been working with Emma for several years and had watched her transform from a traumatized child into a thriving young adult. "You've done something remarkable," Dr. Williams told her. "You've taken your pain and transformed it into purpose. Not everyone is able to do that, and it speaks to your incredible strength and resilience." Emma continued her advocacy work throughout college, speaking at conferences and working with organizations focused on child protection and survivor support. Her reputation as a compelling speaker and thoughtful advocate grew, and she was invited to serve on advisory boards and planning committees for major initiatives. During her junior year, Emma was approached by a publisher who was interested in having her write a book about her experiences. The idea was both exciting and terrifying. Sharing her story in such a detailed, permanent way felt like a huge step. After discussing it with her mother, therapist, and close advisors, Emma decided to move forward with the project. She felt that a book could reach survivors who might not have access to her speaking presentations, and it could serve as a resource for parents, teachers, and other adults who wanted to better understand childhood trauma. Writing the book was emotionally challenging, requiring Emma to revisit painful memories and examine her experiences with a level of detail she'd never attempted before. But it was also therapeutic, allowing her to process her journey from victim to survivor to advocate in a comprehensive way. The book, titled Finding My Voice, A Survivor's Journey from Silence to Strength, was published during Emma's senior year of college. It became a bestseller, not just because of the compelling personal story, but because of Emma's insight into the recovery process and her practical advice for other survivors and their families. Emma used the proceeds from the book to establish a scholarship fund for survivors of childhood sexual abuse who wanted to pursue careers in social work, psychology, or related fields. She wanted to ensure that other young people with similar experiences would have the financial resources to follow their dreams of helping others. As graduation approached, Emma was accepted into a competitive master's program in clinical social work, with a specialization in trauma therapy for children and adolescents. She had also been offered a position at a respected treatment center that worked specifically with young survivors of sexual abuse. Standing at her college graduation, surrounded by family and friends who had supported her through her journey, Emma felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had not just survived her trauma. She had transformed it into a force for positive change in the world. Sarah watched her daughter accept her diploma with tears streaming down her face. The frightened 13-year-old who had once been too terrified to speak up had become a confident young woman with the education, experience, and determination to make a real difference in the world. Detective Rivera, now nearing retirement, was also in the audience. He had followed Emma's journey from that first night in the hospital through all her achievements and advocacy work. Seeing her graduate summa cum laude and prepare to begin her professional career in trauma counseling felt like the perfect ending to one of the most meaningful cases of his career. After the ceremony, Emma was surrounded by well-wishers and reporters who wanted to interview her about her book and her future plans. But she made time to seek out the people who had been most important in her journey. "Thank you," she told Detective Rivera, giving him a hug that conveyed years of gratitude. "For believing me, for fighting for me, for never giving up on getting justice." Rivera had to clear his throat before he could respond. "You did all the hard work, Emma. You were the one who found the courage to speak up. Everything that came after was just us doing our jobs." "Maybe," Emma said with a smile, "but you did your jobs really, really well." Emma also sought out Dr. Martinez, who had continued to follow her progress over the years and had contributed medical expertise to her book project. "I always knew you were going to do something special," Dr. Martinez told Emma. "Even that first night in the emergency room, when you were so scared and hurt, I could see your strength. I just didn't know you'd become such an incredible advocate." As the celebration continued into the evening, Emma found a quiet moment to call Lisa Chen, who had become like a second mother to her over the years. "I wish you could be here," Emma told Lisa over the phone. "You've been such an important part of this journey." "I'm proud of you every single day," Lisa replied. "What you've accomplished is extraordinary. But what makes me happiest is seeing how genuinely happy and fulfilled you are. You've built a beautiful life." That night, as Emma and her mother drove home from the graduation celebration, they talked about the long road that had brought them to this moment. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if Marcus had never?" Sarah began, then stopped, not sure how to finish the question. "Sometimes," Emma replied thoughtfully. "But honestly, I can't really imagine being anyone other than who I am now. The trauma was horrible, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But it also led me to my purpose, to the work I meant to do. I don't think I would have found that path without going through what I went through." It was a perspective that had taken years to develop, this ability to see her trauma as part of her story rather than the defining element of her identity. Emma understood that not all survivors were able to reach this point, and she considered herself fortunate to have had the support systems and resources that made her healing possible. As she prepared to begin her graduate studies and her professional career, Emma carried with her all the lessons she'd learned about resilience, advocacy, and the power of speaking truth even when it's difficult. She also carried the voices of all the other survivors she'd met along the way. Children like Lily who had found the courage to speak up after hearing Emma's story, teenagers who had reached out after reading her book, adults who had broken years of silence after attending one of her presentations. Each of these connections reinforced Emma's belief that her survival had served a larger purpose, that her willingness to share her story had created ripple effects that would protect and empower countless other people. At 22, Emma Patterson had already lived through experiences that would have broken many people. But instead of being broken, she had chosen to be rebuilt. Instead of being silenced, she had chosen to amplify her voice and use it to speak for those who couldn't yet speak for themselves. Her story was far from over. She had decades of advocacy work ahead of her, clients to counsel, policies to influence, and other survivors to support. But the foundation of her adult life was solid, built on truth, resilience, and an unshakable commitment to protecting children and empowering survivors. As Emma looked toward her future, she saw endless possibilities for making a positive impact in the world. The frightened girl who had once believed she was powerless had grown into a woman who understood that her voice, her story, and her determination to help others were among the most powerful tools for creating change. And in a world where too many children still suffer in silence, Emma Patterson's voice continued to ring out clear and strong, reminding survivors that they are not alone, that they have the right to be heard and believed, and that healing and hope are always possible, no matter how dark the journey may seem. The trauma that began in a small house on Elmwood Lane had been transformed into a beacon of hope that would light the way for countless other survivors for years to come. Emma's story was proof that even in the darkest circumstances, the human spirit has the power to not just survive, but to thrive and to help others do the same. And that, perhaps, is the most important message of all. That our greatest pain can become our greatest purpose, and that speaking our truth, no matter how difficult, has the power to change not just our own lives, but the lives of everyone who hears our voice and finds the courage to use their own. If this story has touched your heart, if it's made you think about the children in your own life, or if it's reminded you of the importance of listening when someone finds the courage to speak up, then Emma's voice has done what it was always meant to do. Create awareness, inspire action, and spread hope. Remember, behind every statistic about child abuse is a real person with a real story. These aren't just numbers on a page. They're children who deserve to be protected, believed, and supported as they heal and grow. If you suspect a child is being abused, speak up. If someone trusts you with their story of survival, listen and believe them. And if you're a survivor yourself, know that your voice matters, your story has power, and you are stronger than whatever was done to you. Thank you for taking this journey with Emma, for witnessing her courage, and for carrying her message forward into your own life and relationships. Because in the end, that's how change happens. One voice at a time, one story at a time, one person choosing to speak up rather than stay silent. Emma's story continues every day, in every survivor who finds their voice, in every child who is protected from harm, and in every person who chooses to believe and support those brave enough to tell their truth. And in that continuation, there is hope for a world where no child has to suffer in silence ever again.